hello and welcome to this, as Rita was saying, the 10th in the 21st Century Challenges series. You mentioned, Rita, the Future of Food series, and some of you may have seen it, and I think some of what we did there is perhaps the reason I'm sitting here chairing this meeting today. One of the things we did, the programs were about food security and looking into food security till 2050, and one of the things we looked at were the implications of water scarcity and what that might mean for food security. Now, when you're making a film, when you're out there on the road, the trick is not to be telling your audience anything, not preaching to them, but rather to be showing them things. And when you've achieved that. And for us, that moment came. There were several trips around the world, and that moment for us came when we were in Kenya, and I was walking through with a Maasai herdsman through his land, and talking about what 3 years, or perhaps this was the 4th year, of drought had done to his life and to his stock. He'd had hundreds of cattle before, and he was down to something like 35. And we were walking around his land, and at one point he picked up the carcass of what had been a calf. And it's one of those things where you forget the camera's there. And I just said, what does it make you feel like to see all this? And he said to me, when I see death in my cattle, it feels like a part of me has died too. And it kind of struck home. That was a moment when I felt we showed what water scarcity can mean. It's not something in the future for some people in our world. It's happening right now. They're experiencing it in the worst possible way. Now, not far away from the Maasai herdsman, I also visited a farm. And it was a farm that supplies British supermarkets with vegetables. There were peppers and French beans. And I remember being with the farmer then, heavily irrigated. Okay, so they've had 4 years of drought, but this is a place 364 days of the year. Only Christmas Day is the only day they didn't work. 364 days of the year, they export vegetables to us here in Britain, to British supermarkets. On the day that I was there, we were talking about these exports, and I asked the farmer where these particular French beans were headed, and he said, if we're lucky, this will go off, and he named the supermarket. But he said, we weren't so lucky last week, because half a ton of these heavily irrigated, carefully grown beans were rejected by the export agents because they had a trace of soil on them. And it kind of begged a question, didn't it, to me anyway. What if all this water that was spent growing beans for us, who apparently didn't want them because they were not perfect enough, could have been used to help my Maasai herdsman just down the road? His cattle might have been alive, and what if we grew our own beans? And I think, in a sense, that I think is what we're here to talk about today, to look at the implications of water scarcity for people around the world, but also to look at the implications of the way we live our lives here in this country, in this rich country, and the demands we make of the food chain and the producer chain, the things we want to buy and so on, and how that will affect water scarcity for other people. The other thing, I don't know if our speakers will do this, but to try to perhaps frame today's discussion in that bigger debate about the implications of climate change. Because I think quite often we treat climate change if it was one single big homogeneous event. And of course, the truth is that climate change will affect different people in different ways in different places. And I think to deconstruct the thing and look today at one aspect of it, the water scarcity, its causes and implications, might be, I think, a neat way to get a handle on this other big thing that hangs over all of us, climate change, and help us to find some of the resolutions for that too. So what can be done about water scarcity? Whose job is it to do that? Is it us as citizens, as consumers? Is it our government to pass laws? Is it indeed the job of businesses, multinational businesses around the world to do that? Our panelists, I hope, are going to have all the answers for us. So let me introduce them to you. Firstly, over there, Andy Wales. Andy is head of sustainable development at SAB Miller. It's one of the world's largest brewers, which is brewing interests and distribution agreements across 6 continents. And I guess to make beer, you need to have a lot of water. So Andy's going to be talking about the business end of this and bringing his experience to bear and looking at how business can perhaps look at more sustainable ways of doing what they do. And next to me is Robin Farrington. Robin primarily focuses on engaging the private sector on global water issues. He's with the Worldwide Fund for Nature. His work aims to mobilize companies to reduce the impact of their water footprints on water-stressed ecosystems around the world. The way I'm going to do it today is we'll let our panelists have 10, 15 minutes to speak. And then I will throw it out straight away. And I know it's not always the way it's done here at the RGS, but we thought with so many of you here, such intelligent, bright, inquisitive people, that there's bound to be loads and loads of questions. So in the unlikely event that you dry up, I will then ask 1 or 2 questions. But I'm rather hoping that my job's going to be terribly easy today, and all I've got to do is watch the clock. Okay, so we will open it up fairly quickly to all of you. I'm going to ask Robin to kick off for us today.